Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Live Through Jesus podcast with Courtney Gilmore. On this episode, Giving It Up to God. This is 1 Samuel 1. Today, the person that we are talking about is completely deprived of one of these things that I think we usually take for granted. Something that most people think, oh, I just get married and I have kids. I'm going to find a spouse and I'm going to be able to have children. These are kind of things that are taken for granted. But the person that we are looking at today realizes, no, that is a blessing from God. If you are able to get married and have children, that is a great blessing and something that we should really be thankful for if we have that. And if we don't have it, we realize, like this person, that is because God, for some reason, has withheld that from us. And the only person that can give that to us is the Lord. And so let's go ahead and get into 1 Samuel 1. It begins by talking about a man named Elkanah. And this man was a Levite from the Kohathite tribe, and he lived in the land of Ephraim with his two wives. Now, right off the bat, we're like, wait, is that something God wants? No, it's really not. It's not something that God wants, but it was common in that time frame. And one reason, very common reason, that a godly man would have two wives is because one of his wives was barren. If one of the women could not have children, then oftentimes a man would either take his wife's maidservant, and that maidservant would give children basically to her and him, or he would take on another wife. And so oftentimes the man would take on another wife. And we don't know that is why that Elkanah did this, but we are kind of under that assumption, because we find out at the very beginning that Hannah cannot have any children and that Peninnah does have children. And we don't know which wife was first, but the assumption would be, because it also tells us that he loves Hannah greatly, that he probably married Hannah and they were unable to have any children. And so then he married Peninnah and they were able to have kids. And this was, like I said, very common back in that day. And that would just be our assumption. And so that's how this story starts off. And then it tells us that back in that time, the tabernacle was in Shiloh. It had not yet been moved to Jerusalem, and there was no temple there in Jerusalem. They're still operating off of the tabernacle that God had told them to build all the way back in Exodus before they were ever in the promised land. And God had given them requirements that said 3 times a year, everyone had to go to wherever the tabernacle was and offer sacrifices and have a feast. And so it tells us that at this time, Elkanah went up with both of his wives and all of his children to give sacrifices there at Shiloh. And, there's a lot lacking in this passage, and so we have to just make inferences. But the assumption would be that probably these wives weren't together all of the time. And this time of them having to make this trip together would be a time when they're having to be together. And so it makes it that much more difficult for Hannah, because she's got this in her face of this other woman that was able to give children to her husband. And, that may not be the case. She may be around it all the time, but it tells us that on this trip, this woman is taunting Hannah and telling her basically the whole time how, I was able to have kids for him and you aren't able to have kids for him, and, making her upset. And you would assume she would do that all the time if they were around each other all the time. And so we're thinking that, they're going on this trip. And so he has to bring his whole entire family. And this is forcing Hannah to be around her. And this woman is just tormenting her this entire trip. And this makes Elkanah very sad because he loves Hannah. And so Elkanah had to make sacrifices at this feast, and he would the people would eat the meat that they had sacrificed. Some of it went to the priests and some of it went to the people. And so in verse 4, at the end of verse 4, it says that Elkanah would give portions to Peninnah, his wife, and to all of her sons and daughters. But to Hannah, he would give a double portion because he loved her and the Lord had closed her womb. Now, all of the versions kind of say double because we don't have a real good translation of this verse. But when you look at it in the actual Hebrew, it doesn't say really double portions. It says double noses. And the assumption is, and it makes much more sense this way, that she was given the choicest meat. And so the head was supposed to be the most favored part of the animal. And so what we are assuming that he was actually saying is not that he was giving her, twice the amount, because it's kind of weird that he would give her twice the amount whenever she's one person and Peninnah has herself and all of these children. And so it would make sense that instead of giving her twice the amount, he's saying, I'm giving you the most favored part, double noses, is what, like I said, it's saying in the actual Hebrew. And so regardless of, what exactly this means, the Israelites knew exactly what it meant at the time that he was writing, but regardless of what it actually means, we can tell that he's trying to even the scales here. He's trying to give her something better or more that would, get her evened out with Peninnah. And we also see that he later says to her, Hannah, why do you weep? Why do you not eat? Because we find out that she doesn't give a flip about this extra amount of meat. She is too sick to her stomach to even eat anyway. And so he says, why are you sad? Why do you not eat? Why am I not more to you than 10 sons? And so he's trying to say, I'm giving you this great, meal, trying to even the scales. I love you, and you know that. And so that is trying to even the scales. And she says, yeah, nothing you give me carries enough weight. And so the scales are not even, not to me. I'm still so sad. All I want is a child. And so she is so, so sad, and nothing is equaling this child that she isn't able to have. And maybe there are people listening to this right now that understand that feeling that Hannah has, and my heart breaks for you if that's the case, just as her heart was breaking here. And but I do want to point out that it says here that God is the one that has closed her womb. And so over and over again, we see in scripture how God is the one that is in charge of conception. He alone creates life. We're just participants in the matter. And so why God does this, I can't tell you, okay? I don't know why some people don't have certain things that seem like everyone should have, okay? But I do know that everyone lacks in some way. This is not heaven, and we don't always have everything here on this earth that we want, that we think we should have. And the other devotion that I do on the Live Through Jesus Weekly Devotions podcast, on that podcast, and on the blog post that I'm going to write with this, that is what we're going to talk about. So if you're burdened by the fact that, there are people out there, or you maybe don't have something so essential as a child, and you've been asking for that, or you're wondering why, then we'll talk about that a little bit further on that blog post and that podcast. But we do see here that if you lack something so fundamental as that, the only person that can give it to you is God. And that's what we're going to see here with Hannah. And so after they get finished eating, she is just so distraught. And so she does take her problem to the Lord. And we don't know, she may have done this many, many times, and God may have told her no or wait for all these years. We don't know. But what we do know is this time when Hannah goes to God, she tells him, this is in verse 11, and it says she makes a vow to God. And her vow, she says, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your servant, and you will remember me, and you will not forget me, and if you will give your servant a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall touch his head. And so we know that at least in this prayer, if not before, she has acknowledged that if she gets pregnant, she knows that it is because God has given her this child. And she makes a promise this time to say, if you will give me this child, I'll give him back to you. I will dedicate this child's entire life to you. And the assumption is that she is making the Nazirite vow for her son, because she says no razor shall touch his head. She doesn't tell the other two things that set someone aside as a Nazirite, which are, staying away from unclean things and not drinking alcohol. But by mentioning this one thing, it seems to be indicating that she is making the Nazirite vow for her son. And if you do subscribe to the Substack, and you get this actual lesson, I give all of the references as to where I'm getting all of this information from. But if you don't do that, then just know that I have backup for why I'm saying all of these things, but I can't quote all of it here in this lesson. But in order to make a Nazirite vow, normally that was just something that you would voluntarily do. You would just decide, I'm going to set myself aside for God for a select amount of time for a specific reason. And that was not done by your parent. It was done by you personally, and only for a small amount of time. The only person that we know this was done by his parents and for his whole life was Samson. But even in that situation, God told Samson's parents to do this for him. And this time, Hannah is doing it. The mother is deciding to do it because she's acknowledging that God is the one that's giving her this child. And so she says, if you will give him to me, I will give him back to you. I won't keep him all to myself. I've recognized that he is basically on loan to me. And so you're going to give him to me as a son, and I'm going to be so thankful that I'm going to give him right back to you. And so this is what Hannah does. And while she's saying this prayer, the high priest at the time, who is from the clan of Ithamar, his name is Eli, and he's watching all of this. And he sees this woman praying, and she's so distraught, and maybe praying for a very long time, not a, maybe standard prayer of God, accept this sacrifice and thank you for the things that have happened this year, or maybe even, forgive me of my sins or something like that. But he can tell that she's just, this is out of the ordinary. The way that this woman is praying is out of the ordinary. And it says that he can see her lips moving, but he can't hear what she's saying. And he thinks she's drunk because of the way that she's acting, maybe because of the emotion, and just it looks as if she's babbling. And so he goes over and approaches her, and he says, "How long will you go on being drunk? Put away the wine from you." And Hannah is like, "No, I'm not drunk. I am a woman of troubled spirit. I haven't drank any wine or strong drink. I've been pouring out my soul to the Lord." Said, "I didn't pour any alcohol in my drink. I am pouring out my soul to God. I am filled with sadness and trouble, not with alcohol." Okay. And she said, "Please do not regard me as a worthless woman." And this phrase is actually more like, "Don't look at me like a daughter of Satan." And so, you can imagine how she's sitting out here pouring out her soul to the Lord, and the high priest thinks she's a daughter of Satan. And she's like, "No, please do not think that I am some evil woman. To the contrary, I acknowledge that God is the only one that can give me the thing that I'm asking for, and I'm pouring my heart out to him." And so then Eli says, "Oh, I did not realize this." And so he says, "Woman, go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant your petition that you have made to him." And so she is so thankful, and she says to him, "Let me find favor in your eyes." And so you can tell that she's like, "Oh, I'm so glad that you understand, because the last thing in the world that I would want whenever I'm asking God for the thing that I want most in this life, for the high priest to think that I am some evil woman. And so I'm so glad that I found favor with you." And then it says she does. She goes away in peace. She went away and she ate, and her face was no longer sad. And we're going to talk about that next week, because this lesson was so long. But please tune out in next week to see about why she walks away and is all of a sudden at peace after all of these years of not being able to have a child. Why is she suddenly at such peace? God hasn't promised her a child at this point. And so is it that she thinks that she's going to get this child because she's made this vow to him? Is it because she thinks she's going to get this child because Eli has said this to her? Because she doesn't have it yet. And so why does she feel such peace that she's able to walk away after being so distraught that she can't eat, and then go and eat and enjoy the rest of her trip? Why is it that she's able to do that? So make sure that you look at either, if you subscribe to the Substack, that you read that next week's lesson, or that you listen next week so that you can find out a little bit more about that, because we couldn't include it in this one. But it does tell us that she went away, she was peaceful, and then they left the next morning. They went back to their house in Ramah. And I think I might have missed this earlier, telling where they lived. I told you that they lived in Ephraim, but this is only about 5 miles north of Jerusalem where they live, and about probably 15 miles from Shiloh where they're traveling to. And so they have about a 15-mile travel back home. And it says that when they got back home, that the Lord remembered Hannah, and she conceived and she bore a son, and they called his name Samuel. And this name specifically means name of God. And it says that she names him this because she has asked of him from the Lord. And so some people speculate that this word kind of sounds like heard of God instead of name of God. And so maybe that's why she named him that. But I think that it makes perfect. I don't think we have to make a stretch like that, because it makes sense that she would say, "God, I asked for him of you, and you gave him to me, and now I am naming him of your name." Because what do we do whenever we name a child? We give him the father's name, right? And so what I think she's saying here is, this is your child on loan to me, and I am placing your name on him. from the very beginning, to let you know that I know that he was given to me by you and that he actually belongs to you. And so your name is on him because he belongs to you, and your name is on him because you've given him to me, just like a father would give the child to me. And so they name him Samuel. And then it says that the time came for Elkanah to go back to Shiloh and give his sacrifices again. But this time, Hannah does not go with him. And she asks her husband, she says, "Can I not go with you this time? I don't want to go back to Shiloh until I am taking Samuel back to give him over to the Lord." And it says that Elkanah agrees to this. And all of this is important because you realize that Hannah has made this vow to God, but here we see that Elkanah is honoring her vow. He could have, again, back in Numbers, when it gives the rules of vows, it says that a husband, if he thinks that a wife has made a, impulsive vow and he doesn't want to honor it, he doesn't have to. He can say, "Yeah, I don't think that was well thought out, and I'm not going to allow you to keep that vow." And Elkanah could have easily done this here because this is his son, right? And so he could have said, "You don't get to make that promise to God by yourself, and I'm not going to let you honor that vow." He could have said that. But he would have risked, telling God that he doesn't want to keep a vow that, clearly is stating that, this child was given to him by God. And so if God is going to give him this child, is he going to really withhold the child from the Lord after his wife has vowed to give him over to the Lord? And so we can see that Elkanah is a godly man and that he supported his wife in this vow, and that he agrees that they should give this child back to God if God was going to give them this child after all of these years of them not being able to have a child. And so Elkanah says, "Yes, that's fine." And he goes up by himself or with the rest of his family and his servants and everything, and he goes and makes the vow. And then it says in this is verse 24. It says, "Then when she has weaned Samuel, then she takes him up with her, along with a 3-year-old bull, an ephah of flour, and a skin of wine. And she brought him to the house of the Lord in Shiloh. And the child was still very young." Now, I want to explain to you that the vow offerings, they say that when you make a vow, you have to give some sort of offering to the Lord. But God leaves that up to people's discretion. He says, it could be a vow from your flock or from your herd. It can be, a lamb or a bull, whatever it is that you decide to give to me. And he says, and then he gives all these requirements. If it is a lamb, then this is how much grain you give, and this is how much wine you give. If it is a bull, this is how much grain you give, this is how much wine you give. And so he has vowed a bull. We know that. Normally, it would just be one bull. And again, there's a little discrepancy in the versions because they're not certain if they're saying 3-year-old bull or 3 bulls. So we don't know if the number is applying to the age or to the number of them, okay? But we do know that they give 3 times the amount that is required for the grain and 3 times the amount required for the flour. And so it could have been a 3-year-old bull and then the other times be 3 times that. But I would think that it would probably be 3 times the number of bulls, since it's 3 times the number of flour and 3 times the number of wine. Either way, it doesn't really matter. We just know that he's giving 3 times the amount to the Lord than what would even be required. And already a bull is an expensive vow offering. And so he's giving a lot back to God. And the reason that he's giving a lot back to God is because he's very thankful. He's like, I am so, so thankful that you are giving us this child, that not only am I going to give this child back to you, but I'm going to give you a very expensive offering. And if he's giving these 3 bulls, they said that most likely it would be that he's giving one completely to God as a burnt offering, and then one to Eli for the fact that Eli, we'll find out a little bit later, is going to take over care of this child. And then the third one is for their family. That would be the assumption. If it's a 3-year-old bull, then they all just share it like they would normally if they were to give a vow offering. If he gave 3, this would be well above what he should be asked to do. But it would make sense because of what a great gift this has been to them and what sacrifice Eli is going to be making on their behalf also. And so they bring these animals and give this sacrifice. And then when they reach Eli, it says they bring the child to Eli. And then in verse 26, it says that Hannah says to Eli, "Oh, my Lord, as you live, my Lord, I am the woman who was standing here in your presence praying to the Lord." So she's reminding him, it's like, do you remember whenever I was standing here praying and you thought I was drunk, but I was actually praying for this child? She says, "For this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted me my petition that I made to him. Therefore I have lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he is lent to the Lord." And so that word lent to the Lord shows that she is saying, I know that he was only given to me temporarily. I'm not keeping him forever because God only gave him to me on loan, and I'm giving him back now to God. This shows that I am not just going to thank God for this child that he gave me, but I'm going to give him back to God. And so his life is dedicated to the Lord forever. And so this child is going to stay there with Eli and be raised by Eli. She's giving him, by giving him to the Lord, she's giving him to the service of the Lord forever. So he's going to stay there at the tabernacle. We'll find that out a little bit more next week. And so that's how this chapter ends, is with her giving this child over to Eli, saying, I'm lending him back to the Lord. And so let's just talk about this offering that she's giving, this giving back to God. Hannah is upset for all of these years, as I said, and she has been taunted by Peninnah all of this time. And she prays to God and she makes this promise saying, I will give him back to you if you will only give him to me. And so she's acknowledging and responding to the fact that everything she has, especially her son, comes from God. And so it actually belongs to God. It doesn't belong to her. Though it may be on loan for a time to her, it's not belonging completely to her. And so by physically giving him back, she's demonstrating that she realizes completely that this is a gift from God. And so what I want us to do is just think about the fact that everything we have comes from God. Whether it's something that we've been lacking for a long, long time and we pray for it and then he gives it to us, or if he gives it to us without us ever even asking for it. It is all a gift from God. We take for granted that everyone can just have a child, but no, all of these children that we are given are gifts from the Lord. Every single thing that we have, all of our money, all of our family, all of our friends, the place that we live, the job that we have, every single thing that we have in this life has been given to us by God. And so I'm going to read you 2 verses that talk about that. The first is in Ecclesiastes 5:19, and it says, "For every man to whom God has given riches and wealth, and given him power to eat of it, to receive his heritage and rejoice in his labor, this is a gift of God." So it lists things there, all of the person's riches, the ability to eat of these things and to enjoy the fruits of their labor. All of this is a gift from God. And then in James 1:17, it just tells us this broadly. It says, every good gift and every perfect gift is from above. It comes down from the Father of lights. And so we know that everything we have is from God. And because of that, everything we have doesn't belong totally to us. It's really on loan to us. We have been entrusted these things by the Lord. And if God is going to entrust them to us, if he's going to give these things to us, however long he chooses to give them to us, then we should be good stewards of those things, right? We should be using these things, treating these things as if they've been on loan to us, as if we know that God has given them to us and they're not ours to do with as we choose, without considering what he might think. And so there is a parable in Matthew 25, and it is explaining this to us in human terms. That's what the parables do. They kind of relate something that we already understand to something that is spiritual. And so I'm going to kind of go over this parable with you that is in 25:14 to 28. And so it says that there's this man and he's going on a long journey and he has some servants and he entrusts his property to these servants. And it says that he gives 5 talents to one of the servants, 2 talents to one of the servants, and 1 talent to one of the servants. And the one that he gives 5 to, he invests it and he ends up with 5 more. The one with 2 does the same thing and he has 2 more. But the one that was only given 1 talent, it says that he digs a hole and buries this talent and keeps it safe because he doesn't want to risk losing this. And so he keeps it there. And after a long while, the master comes back and the one with 5 talents says, look, I have invested your talents and I have now 5 more for you. And he says, well done, good and faithful servant. I have entrusted you with a little, and now I will set you over much. And then the same thing happens with the one that has 2. He says, well done and good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in little, I will set you over much. And then when the one that he had given the 1 talent, when he comes to him, he says, Master, I knew that you were a hard man, reaping where you didn't sow and gathering where you scattered no seed. And so I was afraid, and I hid your talent in the ground. And here, this is what you gave me. And the master said, you wicked and lazy servant. If you knew that I have reaped where I didn't sow and I scattered where I didn't have seed, then you should have invested my money with bankers so that when I came back, I would have what I gave you back with interest. And he says, so I will take this talent that I gave you and I will give it to the one that has now made 10. And so what he's trying to say is, if I entrust you with something, don't just take care of that thing, multiply it, make it worth something, do something with this money that I've given you, or this job that I've given you, or this family that I've given you, or this talent that I've given you. Listen to what it says in 1 Peter 4:10 to 11. It says, each man has received a gift and he should use it to serve others as good stewards of God's varied grace. And so he says, if you have been given a gift to speak well, then you should use that gift to speak about God. If you have been given a gift to serve, then use that gift to serve by the strength that God supplies you, in order that in everything that God may be glorified through Jesus Christ. To him belong the glory and dominion forever and ever. Amen. So he's saying, even talents and good character traits that God has given you. Use those for him. Do not squander them away. Don't lose the things that God has given you, and don't just keep them. Use them to do something productive with them. Productive, comes from the word produce, fruit, multiplication, making more. Do this with the things that God has given to you. And so I think that from this, we need to take away that the Lord has given us every single thing that we have, and we need to give back everything that he's given to us, give that back to him. And so we need to be giving God back of our money, back of our time, and so that means giving to the church, giving to others. That means spending time with the Lord. And that also means giving back to him in our jobs, using the job that God has given us to be productive to him in some way, that he's glad that he gave you that job because you're going to use it for some kind of good. Okay. And our husband, our wife, our children, our families, our friends, that we would give them to God, that we would entrust them back to God, just as Hannah was doing, that she is able to entrust these things that God has given to her back to him and say, God, I trust you with these things. I trust you with my family. I trust you with my friends. And since you have entrusted that to me, I am going to, live as a good wife to you, a wife that would be pleasing to you. I'm going to raise these children in a way that would be pleasing to you. I'm going to treat my family members in a way that would be pleasing to you. I am going to be good to my friends and to my coworkers and to all of those that I am around, because I see that you have put them in my path, and I want to make sure that I do with them in something that would be pleasing to you, because you've entrusted them to me. And so all of our relationships, all of our possessions, all our positions, all of our status is a gift from God, and we should use those things in a way that would be glorifying to him. And so listen to what it says in Psalm 116. It says, what can I give back to the Lord for all of the things that he has benefited towards me? I will take of the cup of salvation, and I will call on the name of the Lord. So it says, what do I do for all the things that God's given to me? Well, for one, I'm going to take the salvation he gave to me, and then I'm going to pay my vows to the Lord now in the presence of his people. That's what Hannah did. She made a promise to give back to him. Precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints. Oh Lord, truly, I am your servant. That is what I'm going to vow to you. I'm going to vow to serve you forever. You have loosed my bonds, and so I will offer to you the sacrifice of thanksgiving, and I will call upon the name of the Lord. I am going to serve you forever. I'm going to be thankful to you, and I am going to spend time with you. I'm going to talk to you. I'm always going to call on you. This is what I'm going to do for you because of the things that you have given to me. And so we should offer our bodies in service and obedience to the Lord, right? In Romans 12:1, it says, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you would present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is only your reasonable service. He's like, the only reasonable thing that you can do after the sacrifice that God has made for you is to sacrifice your life for him. We are to be living sacrifices. We don't die for him like he died for us. Instead, we live for him. That is the only thing that we could reasonably do after the things that he's done for us. And so we should be offering our lives up to him for the things that he's done for us. We should also offer up our minds. Our thoughts belong to God. In 2 Corinthians 10:5, It says we should be destroying arguments and every lofty opinion that is raised against the knowledge of God, and take every thought captive to obey Christ. And so what he's saying is every time that we think we know what we're talking about, we should say, is this really what is from God, or is this thought from us? We need to make sure that our thoughts are true to what God would tell us, and if anything is that we're thinking is not obedient to God, is wrong or untrue, then we should throw it out. All of our mind should be dedicated, set aside, offered up to God. Everything that we think, everything that we believe should be offered up to Him. Proverbs 1:7 says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. And so if we fear the Lord, that is where our knowledge comes from. That's where our understanding and our wisdom comes from. That is how we know what to do, is by fearing the Lord and listening to Him. And so we should be offering up not only our opinions, but, how do we get our knowledge? How do we know what we need to do? That is all offered up to the Lord. Our heart should be offered up to Him, so that all of our feelings, all of our concerns, all the things that we care about, all of the things that matter to us should be the things that matter to God. And most of all, our affection to Him. That is what our heart should be consumed by. Mark 12:30 says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and all your strength. And so, that is the least that we can do for what Jesus has done for us. 2 Corinthians 5:15 says that He died for all, so that all who live should no longer live for themselves, but should live for the one who died for them and rose again. That's the least we can do. The least that we can give back to God is everything. That's the least we can do, our whole lives. Everything that He's given to us, everything that we do, everything we say, everything we have, everything we think, everything we feel, all of the things that we care about, all of that should be given back to God, because everything that we have is His. He paid the price for our lives, and so we should give those lives right back to Him. So that's all I have for this week. As I said, next week we will talk about a song that Hannah is going to sing to the Lord, and how she went to God for the one that was going to ultimately meet her need. And so make sure you join me for that episode. And then also, as I said, go to Live Through Jesus weekly devotions and listen to that. It's going to be just a short episode that talks about why maybe God does not give us all of the things that we ask for, why we are lacking in something so fundamental as a child that Hannah was lacking in. And then you can also go and read that blog post at livethroughjesus.substack.com. That blog post is free. Then if you want this lesson all written out with all the scriptures and the references and all of those things, then you need to subscribe for $6 a month or $60 a year. You can then do these lessons by yourself, or you can print out as many copies as you want for that one subscription and do this Bible study with your Bible study group. And so that is a very, very cheap way to do a Bible study with your group. And we're just starting out. So it's a perfect time for you to start on Samuel. And then you also will have access to all of the previous lessons, which are beginning with the 10 Commandments, and then Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, and Ruth. So that's what you get with your subscription. Also, make sure that you follow me on social media at Live Through Jesus. All of the social media, I'll be posting scriptures from there, and also I'll be posting clips from this episode, so you can see all of those things and share those and all of that. And So that's all I have for today. I will see you back next week. Thanks and have a good day.